The unraveling of the Jedi Order does not begin with war or betrayal, but with a quiet misreading of its own history. Centuries without open Sith conflict convince the Order that peace is permanence, rather than a condition requiring maintenance. Vigilance becomes ceremonial instead of instinctive. Absence of threat is mistaken for proof of victory. In that comfort, subtle dangers are reclassified as improbabilities. The first crack forms not from attack, but from assumption. This assumption reshapes how the Jedi interpret the Force itself. They begin to prioritize precedent over presence and doctrine over perception. When disturbances arise, they are filed through procedure, rather than felt as warnings. The Order's confidence in its own continuity dulls its sensitivity to change. Stability becomes a lens that filters out discomfort. The Force is still listened to, but no longer trusted when it contradicts tradition. Qui-Gon Jinn stands as the clearest counterpoint to this drift, because he treats the Force as immediate rather than archival. His focus on the living Force emphasizes responsiveness over regulation. What others dismiss as recklessness, he understands as attentiveness. His warnings about imbalance are not abstract predictions, but present-tense observations. The tragedy is not that he is wrong, but that he is inconvenient. The Order does not reject Qui-Gon openly because that would require confrontation. Instead, it marginalizes his insight by framing it as philosophical deviation. His instincts are tolerated but not integrated. This quiet dismissal reveals how the Jedi have begun to privilege internal harmony over external truth. Dissent is allowed only so long as it does not require adaptation. In sidelining Qui-Gon, they sideline their own capacity for course correction. As politics creep into the temple, this inward focus accelerates. The Jedi's role shifts from guardians of balance to advisors of power. Proximity to authority is rationalized as necessity. Neutrality is redefined as service. Over time, consultation becomes alignment. The Order convinces itself that influence equals protection. In reality, it is being absorbed. Jedi Order slowly trades independence for access. Decisions begin to account for optics rather than wisdom. The temple becomes an extension of governance rather than a counterbalance to it. Moral authority is diluted by political calculus. When power asks for counsel, the Jedi comply even when the request conflicts with instinct. Balance is preserved rhetorically while compromised structurally. This shift has immediate consequences for how individuals are treated within the Order. Anakin Skywalker arrives not as a student to be healed, but as an asset to be evaluated. His trauma is acknowledged intellectually, yet never addressed relationally. Fear is noted but not explored. The emphasis is placed on obedience as a corrective, rather than understanding as foundation. The message becomes compliance over care. Anakin Skywalker is therefore recruited into function before he is supported as a person. His fear of loss is seen as risk rather than injury. Training is designed to regulate behavior instead of process experience. Each test reinforces the idea that worth is conditional. He learns quickly that acceptance depends on performance. Healing is deferred indefinitely. This approach reflects a broader institutional habit of mistaking control for balance. By suppressing symptoms rather than addressing causes, the Order ensures instability will resurface elsewhere. Anakin's emotions do not disappear. They migrate into secrecy. What is unspoken gains power. The Jedi interpret calm as success without noticing the pressure beneath it. Silence becomes evidence rather than warning. As the dark side begins to cloud the Force, this miscalculation becomes more dangerous. The Jedi sense distortion, yet rely increasingly on procedure to compensate for uncertainty. Councils are convened, reports are filed, and debates are held, while intuition is sidelined. Trust shifts from perception to protocol. The more uncertain they feel, the more rigid they become. Flexibility is mistaken for weakness. This rigidity creates a feedback loop where diminished perception justifies increased control. The dark side thrives not because it overwhelms the Jedi, but because it exploits their hesitation to trust themselves. Each moment of doubt is answered with bureaucracy. Each warning is deferred for consensus. By the time agreement forms, the opportunity has passed. The Order becomes reactive by design. The early era therefore establishes a pattern of slow erosion rather than dramatic failure. Every compromise feels reasonable. Every delay feels responsible. The Jedi remain powerful, yet increasingly disconnected from the Force as lived experience. Their confidence masks fragility. The cracks widen quietly under the weight of consistency. What breaks later has already been weakened here. Peace is assumed rather than protected. Insight is filtered through tradition. Politics reshape priorities. Anakin is shaped by expectation instead of compassion. The dark side presses closer not through force but through patience. The conditions for collapse are in place long before the war begins. The Clone Wars do not interrupt the Jedi Order's decline, they complete it by turning quiet compromise into lived reality. What had once been theoretical concessions become daily habits reinforced by urgency. The Order accepts command because refusal feels irresponsible in wartime. Each battlefield decision tightens the alignment between Jedi and state. The war does not corrupt them. Suddenly it trains them patiently. By becoming generals, the Jedi trade moral distance for operational relevance, and that trade proves fatal. Leadership over armies reshapes how they are perceived and how they perceive themselves. Guardianship gives way to command authority. Protection becomes indistinguishable from enforcement. Public trust erodes not through propaganda alone, but through visibility and violence. The Jedi are seen issuing orders, not offering guidance. Jedi Order loses its symbolic neutrality the moment it embraces militarized hierarchy. Once robed figures of balance now stand at the head of battalions. The distinction between peacekeeping and warfare collapses. Each victory reinforces the idea that force is the language of resolution. The Order remains powerful, yet increasingly unrecognizable to itself. War normalizes compromise because survival reframes morality. Surveillance is justified as protection. Secrecy is justified as strategy. Executions are justified as deterrence. Each justification is narrow and immediate, yet cumulative in effect. The Jedi accept measures they would have once condemned because the alternative feels worse. Ethics become situational, rather than foundational. This normalization alters internal culture as much as public perception. Debate yields to urgency, and patience yields to decisiveness. The Force is consulted less as an inner compass and more as a tactical advantage. Meditation gives way to briefings. The rhythm of war reshapes priorities until reflection feels indulgent. In trying to save the Republic, the Jedi adopt its most corrosive habits. Nowhere is this erosion more visible than in how Anakin is treated during the war's most intense phase. His value as a commander rises even as trust in him collapses. Praise is offered for results while suspicion shadows every failure. Mentorship recedes precisely when pressure peaks. The Order sees risk and responds with distance. The timing could not be worse. Anakin Skywalker is isolated not by malice, but by fear of what he represents. The Council monitors rather than supports. Questions replace conversations. Loyalty is tested instead of affirmed. In the midst of escalating visions and personal terror, Anakin finds the Order increasingly unavailable. The silence feels deliberate, even when it is procedural. This isolation pushes him toward the only figure who consistently offers engagement rather than evaluation. Palpatine listens without demanding conformity. He reframes Anakin's fear as insight rather than weakness. In contrast, the Jedi offer restraint without reassurance. The difference is subtle but decisive. Trust follows presence. Palpatine does not defeat the Jedi with strength, but with legality and optics refined through patience. Emergency powers are extended, not seized. Votes are secured, not coerced. Each maneuver is wrapped in the language of necessity. The Jedi remain focused on military outcomes, while political reality shifts beneath them. By the time they react, the framework has already changed. The irony is that lightsabers are never the deciding factor. The Jedi prepare for confrontation, while Palpatine prepares consensus. They look for betrayal in shadows while it unfolds in chambers. Their attention is outward when it should be inward. The Sith outplay them by understanding institutions better than warriors understand wars. Procedure becomes destiny. When the Jedi finally move against Palpatine, it is already too late because the narrative has been set. Their action appears treasonous rather than protective. Years of alignment with state power make independence unreadable. The public sees generals rebelling, not guardians intervening. Legitimacy collapses in an instant because it was hollowed out over years. Timing is everything and the moment has passed. The execution of the final command succeeds not because the Jedi are weak, but because they are exposed. They have centralized authority without preserving trust. Their reliance on the clone army reflects earlier compromises accepted without scrutiny. Obedience trained for war is redirected effortlessly. The system obeys itself. Collapse arrives quietly and everywhere at once. This outcome reveals that the Order did not fall to overwhelming force, but to rigidity mistaken for consistency. Flexibility would have required humility. Humility would have required listening. Listening would have required slowing down in a war that punished hesitation. The Jedi chose coherence over adaptation and paid the price. Strength without reflection proved brittle. The final failure is therefore structural, before it is personal. Individual heroism cannot compensate for institutional drift. Insight cannot survive when procedure is treated as virtue. The dark side clouds perception, but the refusal to trust instinct completes the blindness. What remains is a powerful organization, unable to recognize its own transformation. The fall is not shocking, it is inevitable. Seen in full, this arc reframes the Jedi tragedy as a warning about guardians who become administrators of force. Their ideals remain intact in rhetoric while dissolving in practice. By the time they realize the difference between peace and control, the language has been captured. Balance cannot be defended by abandoning it. The Order learns this too late. This closing movement insists that collapse is rarely loud at the beginning. It is incremental, rational, and well-intentioned. The Jedi do not betray their code. They reinterpret it until it no longer protects what it names. War accelerates this reinterpretation until identity lags behind action. When the end comes, it feels abrupt only because the preparation was quiet. That is the final lesson embedded in their failure.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.